Hey guys, happy Sunday. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I'm your host, Kelly Barrett, here at Etc. on the Vibe Live. I am super thrilled for my guest today because I'm a huge fan of the Northern Pikes. So let's just get to it and say hello to one of Canada's premier singers, songwriters, composer, author, Jay Semko from the Northern Pikes. Hi, Jay.
Hey Kelly, how are you doing?
I am well. Thank you for coming back this weekend.
Hey, thanks for having me back. It's a day of change here in Saskatoon. The weather is doing a drastic turnaround from being very cold to getting exceptionally warm. And I know we were talking about that earlier because you're in southern Alberta, where that's where we get some of our weather from, rolling in with the Chinook thing going on. So it'll be interesting. It's always an interesting thing when that happens.
It's warming up here too, and thanks everybody for tuning back in again. Of course, we the internet gods were not on our side last week, but they are this week, and so we're happy to be back with Jay. First of all, it's a pleasure to have a fellow Saskatchewan on the show. I'm from Regina, as we were talking about earlier, and so yeah, it's nice to have somebody from my neck of the woods. And Jay, we have a lot to talk about because you have some really really cool projects on the go outside of the Northern Pikes. You've got a new book out. We're going to get to that in a bit here. I always like to get a little bit of a backstory, though. Can you go ahead, Jay, and tell us how you get started in this crazy industry?
Wow. Well, first of all, as a kid, I really loved music, and I became intrigued with musical instruments. I remember my granny and grandpa Semko both were musicians, and my grandpa would he played the violin, and he would also build and repair violins. And my granny played a little bit of guitar and a little bit of piano, and they would kind of jam out together. And they had a reel-to-reel kind of quarter-inch tape recorder. And I remember being somewhere the tape exists of me being about 5 years old and playing a drum along with them as they were playing, and that kind of thing. And anyway, I kind of grew up sort of around music. My parents, even though they really weren't musicians, my dad tried to learn how to play the guitar, and that's how I kind of initially picked it up. He had one of those uh, kind of Mel Bay learn to teach yourself the guitar kind of books in a little guitar, and he would be trying to practice and play, Red River Valley or simple kind of songs like that. And I started trying to do that too, and I was able to pick up on it. And I did take piano lessons. I lived out in a farm, I guess, from grade 1 to grade 7. And they did have piano lessons available at the school for quite cheap. And so I took piano lessons for a couple of years, but I never really got all that proficient at it. But and then we moved into the city. I guess the year before we moved into the city, I started kind of noodling around on the guitar, and I started taking guitar lessons at the YMCA in Saskatoon. And I would go in for swimming lessons on Saturdays, and I saw one day that there was an ad there for guitar lessons. And so I asked my folks about it, and so I started doing guitar lessons at the YMCA. So I did that for, I guess, about 3 months worth of guitar lessons. And yeah, I was kind of hooked after that. And I just loved music. I really did. I loved listening to the radio. I had all the hits memorized of the day, and I had a little transistor radio that I used to listen to late at night with one single earphone. Maybe that's why I'm more deaf in one ear than the other now. I don't know. But the so yeah, and then I guess really once we moved to the city, I was exposed to a lot more people who could play music, and I started taking actually guitar lessons, and then eventually bass lessons, like Gordy Brandt's music in Saskatoon. And from that, I had a good ear for picking things up quickly, and between, I guess, the lessons and just practicing like crazy, but I never looked at it as hard work or anything. It was something I just really loved to do, was playing the guitar and playing the bass. And I would play along with records, and back, it was all vinyl then, so it was just like lift up the needle. Got to be kind of an expert at finding the right spots, because you would often have to listen to sections of a song over and over again to be able to get it. And so I did. So I just kept practicing and started playing with bands in high school. And I guess by the time I was in grade 11 or 12, I was pretty regularly playing in bands, and really just continued doing that. And I guess once I got out of high school, started trying to write songs, which was a trial and error task. I didn't really, there was no roadmap. So, I just had to learn. And so I wrote a lot of really fairly terrible songs. They were just really not happy. Well, they were just very derivative. And I just needed to kind of work my way through and find my own way, and actually eventually started writing some better songs, and was lucky enough to be in a few different bands where we did original music and played our own songs, and at the same time went out and did the bar circuit where you would play, back in the late 70s and early 80s, you could play 6 nights a week in nightclubs, in bars, often every little town in the West here, at least that I recall, through Manitoba and Saskatchewan, Alberta, would have a bar, and they would have many of them had live music, and it was really good. And the Northern Pikes, I think that was a big part of our development, was to becoming a better band, playing 6 nights a week in clubs for a few years, and developing yourself. So I guess in a brief nutshell, that's kind of how I guess I got going here. But it was just really a passion for music, and being fortunate enough to be around making some friends, I guess, once I moved to Saskatoon, that were into music like I was. Like in the same block I lived on, I was really lucky. There was Jimmy Walker, who was a really good drummer. In fact, at age 16, he was the world amateur snare drumming champion. He played in pipe and drum bands, but he was a great rock and roll drummer too. And a guitarist named Mark Wolf, who was who I played in a number of bands with in my early days of playing music. Oh, there's my dog. Hello. Hi. And then yeah, so getting the chance to kind of jam with these guys, and be able to noodle around as a 12, 13, 14-year-old kid, you know well, more like 13 and 14 and 15, I guess, really, when I look at it. And yeah, I became proficient at it and was able to join bands. We played lots of covers, and then just like I say, it was a natural progression into writing songs myself. But the great thing about music is you just keep going. I still, to this day, every day I learn something new that I never in a million years would have dreamed of. It's just a pretty fascinating. Music is just extremely fascinating, and it never ceases to be for me.
And so, Jay, what do you think the turning point for the Northern Pikes was? Where you went from playing the clubs and the venues to taking the next level. What do you think that was for you, for the band?
Oh, well, it was definitely signing a record deal. I mean, we ended up we recorded two independent, uh, well, I call them albums. I guess you could call them EPs, but one had 6 songs on it, which we released in 1984. We were playing in bars, and we just stashed our money away and lived on really nothing, next to nothing, and sunk it all into a kitty to be able to pay for recording. So we did that. We recorded an independent EP entitled "The Northern Pikes" in 1984, and then another one called "Scene in North America" in 1985. And with those albums, they were vinyl records. I mean, we sent them out all over Canada and the United States, and a few places beyond, and basically to college and community radio stations, and places where we thought somebody could be there that could assist us in getting our music heard. And one thing that was really smart, that a guy who was helping us a lot at that time, and he was our agent, Robert Hodgins. What Robert had suggested that we do, and he got these cards. He suggested, and then we said yes. And so he got these cards together, and they were basically self-addressed little cards that were kind of like a little tracking report or something, where uh, they were sent out with the album when they went to the radio station, and then it was easy for them to just make a comment, playing it sounds great, et cetera, et cetera. Then they had the address of the band, and we started receiving charts back from various stations all over the US and Canada. And the both albums, the first one, just the self-titled, did very well. It got played at tons of stations, and charting very well within the college music world. And so we started developing a name for ourselves. And also, we had a lot of good support in the early days, especially from CBC, and they were starting to do more rock music, I guess, late in the evening. And I remember they did a simulcast a couple of simulcasts of us. One was done from the Horseshoe in Toronto, Horseshoe Tavern, I remember, and then another one we did in Winnipeg, I think. I think it was at the we used to play a place that was called Broadway's in the Fort Garry Hotel, the haunted, crazy haunted Fort Garry
There's always
Hotel.
one of those. There's always one of those haunted hotels.
Yeah, so I guess it was a bunch of those things combined, and what that did is it started to generate interest from record labels, and they started to think, well, this band's maybe got something happening, and we started to get a lot of press as a result of the airplay that we were getting, and plus the fact that we were on the road all the time. We were playing live anywhere and everywhere, and so ultimately, I guess we started getting people coming out to our shows to see us play, and from various record labels. And one of the people that came out was, I guess, in the fall of 1985, Doug Chappelle from Virgin Records, Canada, came out. He flew out specifically to see us playing at this showcase event that was going on at TCU Place in the Centennial Hall in Saskatoon. And yeah, he fell in love with the band. He really liked us, and he liked our songs, and he liked the band's, I guess, presence. And he indicated that he was interested, and we just kept playing, and he kept following us over the next year or so, and really to the point where we were offered a record deal from Virgin, I guess in September or I guess it was late September of 1986, which took a few months to negotiate and get through, and it was finally signed just before Christmas, actually, in December of 1986. And I remember that was a huge thing for us because back in those days, it was, even though you could be an independent artist and be on your own label, et cetera, it was still a lot more fledgling than it has become, and it's become a lot more of the norm now for independent artists, to be doing their own thing. But back then, in the mid '80s, you really kind of it was very valuable to have a record label on your side, helping to promote and publicize your records and get them to radio. And so we were signed. We ended up signing the deal with Virgin Records. Yeah, and I remember we played at the place called the Copa in Toronto. That was just before Christmas of '86, and then we flew home for I guess about 10 or 12 days, and then came back just at New Year's and started work on the first album for Virgin, which was Big Blue Sky. And we worked on that in Toronto. We started at a place called Metalwork Studios, and then ended up going to a bunch of different studios in and around Toronto and Hamilton. We ended up doing some recording at Grant Avenue Studios in Hamilton, which is a studio that became very famous for being owned by the Lanois brothers, Dan and Bob. The late Bob. Bob unfortunately passed away fairly recently, and but it was yeah, it was a great experience for us. We were in a lot of different studios, and we started rolling on it, and then you just kind of there's a little lag time, which happens every time you release an album with a major label, where we would finish the recording, and then you kind of take a break. You go home for a little while and chill out and do whatever you're going to do, and then the machine starts getting cranked up in terms of getting promotion together. And our pattern was always record an album, take a little bit of a break, although the breaks got shorter and shorter as time went on to the point where we were really hardly taking breaks, and then doing promo, and then doing tours and just going out on the road. And depending on what level we were at the time in regards to our career, from about 1987 to 1993, we would do, sometimes it was clubs, and then we kind of worked our way out of that to the point where we were doing basically soft cedar venues. And we played a lot of, by that I mean like theaters and things like that, and rinks and stuff, and developed a pretty good following and had some good singles on the radio and stuff like that. And it was an adventure. It really was. It was a neat thing, and I never imagined that I would ever that we were ever going to sign a record deal with a major record label. Our realistic goal was more that we would hopefully get, because we had our own record label, just Northern Pikes Records, and we were hoping that well, originally it was Black and Round Records. Anyway, we ended up eventually, signing a full record deal, and our original intent was that hopefully we could get our records picked up through our own independent label and get them distributed through a major record label. But we were able to go a little bit beyond that and sign directly to Virgin. And we were treated very well by Virgin Records. Doug Chappelle, the late Doug Chappelle, unfortunately, Doug passed, not that long ago. It's still kind of a shock to me. It seems like it was very recently, but it's a little while ago now. But anyway, he was a great friend, and he was very supportive of the band. And it was, yeah, it was crazy, wild, fun. Not always fun,
Great,
but
great
it was
memories,
it was always interesting. Let's put it that way.
there's something about the Pike songs that, and there are 5 or 6 of them are on my playlist right now. They just take me back to a different time, and maybe a simpler time. And the one thing that I always really loved about the Pikes is that there's like essentially 3 lead singers, which doesn't happen very often.
Well, yeah, we were kind of a bit of an anomaly that way. I know there are other bands where that has happened, and but it wasn't really happening then at that time, really. I mean, we started off, and at the beginning of the Northern Pikes, really Merle was the kind of the lead singer, and then I was singing a little bit, and then we were all starting to contribute to the writing. And then Brian started getting enough confidence, and he was starting to write his own songs. I remember the first one that really we recorded was "Hopes Go Astray" on "Secrets of the Alibi" album, and that was when Brian first sang, and he was just kind of getting his sea legs, so to speak, in regards to feeling comfortable with singing. And I remember he sang the bridge in "Hopes Go Astray," and he wrote that song, and that gave him, I think, the confidence to continue writing his own songs. So by the time we got to Snow in June, we had a huge, I guess, cache of songs to choose from. And to Doug's credit, I mean, it must have been a little weird for him and the record label to go, okay, well, there's the guy that sang Teen Land, Merle, who was sort of designated as a bit of a lead singer in that particular song. But then the next single was Things I Do for Money, which I sang. And then it was kind of this alternating. And by the time we got to Snow in June, you had a third lead singer. And, but I don't know, to me, I always thought that was cool. I always loved that with the Beatles. I love they had multiple singers. And you see it, bands that came maybe just a little bit after us, like Sloan, where I'm hoping that maybe we paved the way a little bit for that, to say it's okay to have multiple lead singers in a band and multiple writers and stuff like that. And Sloan, one of the great Canadian bands. And I mean, and Blue Rodeo at around the same time we were getting going. They signed the record deal roughly around the time we did. And I remember seeing them many times in clubs in Toronto. And they always had just really great vocals, how they worked together, Greg and Jim, and they sang so well together. And obviously went on to become, mega band, superstars. And so, yeah, I don't know. Like I say, it's always an adventure. And like I say, I give credit fully to Doug from Virgin for the fact that he was cool with having a band that didn't just have one person who was the identifiable figure for the band. And like I say, that was something I really loved with bands like the Beatles, where, or even the Monkees. You knew all the members, and different people that sang different songs. And I just always thought that was a cool thing. And we were
Right.
fortunate we were able to do that.
I'm curious, when you write a new song, how do you decide who sings it when you have 3 amazing singers in the band?
Well, now generally whoever writes it sings it. So, our version of the Northern Pikes, as it's been since 2017, is now Brian Potvin, guitar and singing, and obviously songwriting, and Don Schmidt on the drums, doing some songwriting. And Donnie can sing. He can sing the odd song. He does a wicked version of Secret Agent Man that we pull out live every now and then. and another one, he did a Beatles song, Boys. I think the Ringo song, Boys. And our newest guy is Kevin Kane, originally from and still plays with the Grapes of Wrath, and which is amazing to have him in the band. And I mean, and Merle was our original 4th guy, and Merle stopped playing in the Pikes in 2005, and yeah, he was just regrouped. I guess we played really up until mid 1993. And then we broke up, not really intending that we would ever play again. At least I didn't think that would happen. And then Virgin ended up putting out a best of album. I guess the first of three that eventually got released, but that one was called Hits and Assorted Secrets. And so we started communicating, the members of the band, Merle and Brian and Donnie and myself, about which songs we wanted to go on there. And there were a few that had been previously unreleased tracks that were recorded during the Snow and June sessions, and they ended up going on there. And so we thought, well, gee, we've got a record coming out on a major record label, and we hadn't really played as a group for almost 7 years, and
Right.
thought, well, let's go out and play and see what it's like. So we went out. We went out and toured, and haven't really looked back since. We have had long stretches where we haven't played, and we're like a band is like a family. So you have it ebbs and flows, and we've had times when we've all gotten along together very swimmingly, and a few times where we've had some conflicts, and sometimes it just takes a bit of time to work that stuff out, and you work it out, and you realize, we're all brothers, and we all really love playing music together. So
And you have the common goal, right? And
find a
so
way to make it work. So we did, and it's been, I think, as time goes by, so you get more, you really feel a sense of gratitude about playing. But like I say, once we started playing back in 2000, and we recorded a new album entitled Truest Inspiration. It was new to us at that time in 2000. And then it did another one in 2003 called It's a Good Life. And then really, there were a couple of best of albums. One was called Icon, one was called Platinum. They were from series, a series of albums that had been released. And then there was another live record. And then in 2017, it was the 30th anniversary of the Big Blue Sky album. And
right,
so we decided we were going to do a tour right across the country. And our catalog now is with Universal Music. That's who's got all the Northern Pikes catalog now. It's Universal Music. And so they put out this very cool package. It's like a triple album, triple colored vinyl. The album, they're white, red, and blue, or I guess red, white, and blue. Each record is a different color,
oh
and
neat.
yeah, and it's pretty cool. So there's a live. What there is was there's a live concert that was kind of unearthed from some tapes that were discovered by, I think it was Doug McClement, our friend in Toronto, who's recorded this live many, many times. And anyway, it was a show that was originally on CFNY in Toronto, which was a big station, big alternative music station, and they did a live recording of us at the Horseshoe. And so there's a live recording. One of the albums, the vinyl albums, is live at the Horseshoe. Another one is the full original album of Big Blue Sky, and then the third one is other tracks that were recorded and never released, generally as demos or working versions of other songs and that kind of thing. So that was cool. So that was our first kind of, I guess, full tour with our current lineup. And yeah, we've just continued to play. Obviously, things have slowed down quite a bit in the last couple of years, But yeah, we played twice. Well, we didn't play for a long time. I mean, I remember we did a couple of nights at the Horseshoe Tavern in Toronto, November 1st and 2nd of 2019, and then we didn't play again until we played the Saskatchewan Jazz Festival. We were the closing artists at the Saskatchewan Jazz Festival in the summer of 2021, and that was in August, and it was fun. I mean, we played the following week in Winnipeg at a multi-band, multi-artist thing that was supposed to be outdoors by what used to be called the Walker Theater. Now it's the Burton Cummings Theater, and but it rained, so they moved everybody inside. But that was with 5440 and the Jim Cuddy Band, and I think a band called the Trebles from Winnipeg. Anyway, we've played lots of gigs together with 5440 and Jim and Blue Rodeo and many other musicians over the years, and it was so good to see everybody. And I sort of got the vibe from from the guys, in 5440 and the people in the Jim Cuddy band, that we were all so happy to see each other, and like, wow, this is great. We're out playing music again. We're on this, we're on a multi-band venue, and we get to, for me, that's what's part of the fun when you play those things, is you get to see friends you haven't seen in a long time. I mean, when I think of some of the musicians that, some of those other musicians I was mentioning, I mean, I've been seeing them live, and we've been playing shows together since, the 80s, basically, off and on. So you get to know each other a little bit, and you do become friends, and it's really nice to be able to see each other. And I think, I think there's big anticipation about more live music going to happen over the next little while. And but, it's funny. In 2020, we were supposed to do a third show in Newfoundland, and it was, but the hurricane happened. So we basically flew into St. John's, and the next day flew out of St. John's, and just missed the hurricane, which hit on that evening. And that was a show with, oh, I don't remember who all was on the bill, but it was, oh, I think it was Honeymoon Suite. Yeah, Honeymoon Suite and April Wine and ourselves. It was a three band thing. So it would have been fun to play and see the other guys playing, and that kind of thing. But anyway, although apparently Brian, when he flew from Halifax, ended up sitting with Miles from April Wine, and they had a great chat about music and that kind of thing. Anyway, just adventures you go through. We were lucky to be able to get out of there. So from there, we flew to Halifax, and then ended up driving out to the South Shore, where we uh, continued the work we had started 2 years previously on a new album. So the Northern Pikes have an album that's going to come out sometime this year, sometime in 2022, and we've been chipping away at it at Stonehouse Sound in Mahone Bay with John D.S. Adams engineering, and it's yeah, it's been fun. It's been fun working on it. We have some new stuff, and we're remaking some, or re-record. I wouldn't even say re-recording, because they're really very different versions, but they're a number of the songs from the Snow and June album. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see when we get everything completed there. So like I say, we're chipping away at that, but we really started it in 2019. So there's been this kind of gap of, I don't know, it's kind of like a block of time where it seemed like, but I did make use of my time in terms of other projects. One of the things that I did was I wrote,
Let's
I
get to the
finished
book of
this book I've
poetry.
been kind of working on forever. It's my first book. It's called The Poetry and Lyrics of J. Semko, which is sort of I guess it's just a really honest name, because that's what they are. A lot of them lyrics from solo records that I've done, as well as just standalone poems. And I'd say it's kind of roughly half and half. And yeah, so I'd been talking about that for ages, and I finally put my nose to the grindstone
Now's
and
the
really
time.
worked at it. It was a lot of work. There was a lot of other editing to do, and a lot of times, if you get song lyrics, uh, sometimes they'll sing really well. They sound good when you're singing them, but when you look at them on the written page, they may not just stand up as well, and at least to me. So yeah, I went through numerous edits, a lot of finishing things that were 2/3 of the way there, and yeah, it was a great experience. And now the book's out, and I'm super excited about that. So
Super
it came out.
exciting. You described the book as being truly a labor of love for me. It contains a selection of original poems and song lyrics exploring my experiences with addiction, recovery, bipolar disorder, faith, spirituality, love, relationships, and the abstract realm. And I'm wondering, given that description of the book, Jay, was there a really deep sense of vulnerability? There had to have been, to write this book, as opposed to writing lyrics for songs, maybe.
Well, there is. I really wasn't. I didn't write the book with an intent. I just really wanted to put together an interesting collection of poems that I'd written. It's really what I was trying to do. And then I kind of realized, when I looked at the whole group of them all, that a lot of these songs have to do with me really being, I guess, really blunt and super honest about my my mental health challenges and my addiction. And I am a recovering addict, and with that, I include my addiction to alcohol, and I I have bipolar disorder. I used to say that I am bipolar, but I've learned that it's better to refer to it as that I have bipolar disorder. And I was first diagnosed with that back in my early 20s, and I ended up having a lot of mental health challenges, and ended up being in this psychiatric ward at the city hospital here in Saskatoon for many weeks. And you know, I've been in and I've tried to self-medicate for many years with a lot of different things, which, sometimes works for a little while and then it doesn't, and then it's gets really bad. And so I've ended up I've been in, you know, I've been in a couple of treatment centers, and I've been in a detox ward, and I've had those experiences to kind of deal deal with. But I don't know. I guess it's sort of a cliche, but what doesn't kill you makes you stronger sometimes. And I found when we did our Big Blue Sky 30th anniversary tour in 2017, one of the I guess I wouldn't classify them as a sponsor or anything, but they came along on the tour, was CAMH, which is the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, and they have a big facility in Toronto, and they're becoming more of a nationally and internationally known facility. And they uh, they had a booth at every one of our shows. So out in the lobby, if you're in a theater, out in the lobby, we would have like a merchandise table where we'd have shirts and albums and memorabilia or that kind of thing. And usually very close to that would be the CAMH booth. And during the course of each show on that tour, on the Big Blue Sky tour, we would take a couple of minutes, and I would just do a very brief sharing of at least some of my experiences and challenges that I've had with my mental health and with addictions. And it was right before we would play Teen Land, because that's kind of what that song, to a certain extent, has. Definitely has some references to that in there. Anyway, I ended up. We would go out, and at the end of the shows, we would go out to the lobby, and we would sign stuff for people and do a meet and greet and that kind of thing. And also by the CAMH booth, during the course of the show, we would mention, please go out and get information. And there was always somebody from CAMH that was manning the booth, and I had literally at every show, I would have many people more. I was shocked at how many people would come up to me and basically say, I'm really glad you shared your story. Uh, it's really good to hear people to hear from somebody that's has dealt with and is dealing with this regularly. And the reality is there's so many of us that do deal with this on a daily basis, whether it's ourselves or with a family member or a friend or uh, a workmate or a partner or anybody that might be in your life. We all most definitely have some connection with somebody that's with dealing with this stuff. So I'm just kind of hoping that some stigma gets removed from that, and we just, I know once again it's the cliche, the bell let's talk, but talking is really important. It's really important. And torch to a certain extent. And I'm not afraid to talk about it. Let's put it that way. And I realized when I looked at the whole mass of poems that I had for the book, or the ones that I was feeling were right for this book, that there were a lot of the poems really had to deal with my experiences and with mental health and addiction. And so, I've been pretty blunt about that, and I sort of realized. So I did put that. I do talk about that in the introduction to the book and in the synopsis at the end, and obviously the publisher, Wood Dragon Books. I mean, and Jeannie Martinson, a huge help to me in that regard in terms of getting everything going and doing things correctly, etc. Because this is the first book I've written. Although now that I've written this, I have three more, three more on the go right now. So there's never a shortage of something to do. And I guess what it is I kind of, after being really freaked out for the first, I guess 8 months of the COVID-19 pandemic, and really not doing very well with it, and really kind of really not doing mentally well with that. I was able to sort of find my way out of that, and the book really helped me to get out of that, because I thought, well, I got to put my nose to the grindstone, and I got to, and that's one thing I did learn. The last time I was in a treatment center was in December of 2018 and January of 2019, and I spent 2 months there. And one of the things I really realized was that I need to keep writing this stuff down. I need to keep talking about it. It's really important to me and to my mental health and to my recovery. So, you know, if people can relate to what's going on within the context of some of the poems that are in the book, then that's a cool thing. If I can, even if one person says that's cool, and I think that might have helped me out, then that's a positive thing. But I mean, when I wrote it, that's just me giving my own personal thoughts. I did not write it with any other intention other than just sharing my thoughts and experiences in poetry. And words are so fun. I mean, the one thing I did realize, and I think it will really actually improve my lyric writing, or it has improved my lyric writing, I think, is just um, realizing the power in a space, the power in a word unto itself, and it's just really fascinating. And I mean, I am a writer. I've written lyrics for many years and that kind of thing. But it was definitely a challenge putting the book together. And at the end of it, a ton of work, but a good feeling of satisfaction. And I'm still kind of in early days, I guess, of kind of promoting the book. I was hoping to do a bit of a book tour and go out and do some public appearances, which I think will happen. That's going to happen. And I'm planning to do an online kind of a night of poetry and music, which is going to happen. I haven't set the date yet. We have to look at. There's a couple of factors involved here, but I'm anticipating that being in early March, and so that's going to be kind of fun. And it's just one of those things where it's a whole other facet of things. There's been lots of things that I've done in in my world that I've been lucky to be involved in, like writing film scores and for TV shows. I mean, that's something that I really had planned or intended to do. It was just an opportunity that came along, and I was lucky that I had a knack for it. And it's the same old thing. It's hard work. It's practice and work. I mean, practice makes perfect. It's just, sometimes you have to repeat things and you really have to dig in, and it's just, there's nothing beats sometimes just hard work in what you're trying to do. And I'm by nature very very, I wouldn't call myself necessarily lazy, but I like to procrastinate a lot. And oh yeah, I'll do it tomorrow. So quite often it ends up being something where I'll really get a lot done. And sometimes, I can remember now when now many years later, I can look back at flurries of work that I've completed in terms of writing or recording or things like that. And a lot of it happened when I was really on the high end of one of my manic episodes, and I could just, but now, it's just not good. It's not good for your health to be living like that, because for every up, there's a real down. And like I said, I would self-medicate. It was this crazy merry-go-round of never really finding my way out of it. So now, not that everything's completely perfect or anything. Life has daily challenges, I'll tell you that. But feeling a little more balanced now anyway. And I think writing the book was a great help for me in that regard. Would you like to hear a poem from the book? It says, "You're in the show. Everyone can see and hear you." So I guess I'm still alive, although I don't know, Kelly, I don't know where you went. Are you still there? Hmm. Well, I'm not sure if I'm still live, but I'll read a poem anyway. Let's see. I'm going to read one here that's, this is maybe a little bit, I have some friends that probably will be able to relate to this one here. See, my eyes are still watering. I had eye tests done. I had eye surgery done earlier this year, and so I went back and I had they did the whole thing on Friday where they dilate and freeze your eyes, and almost takes me a couple of days to kind of get out of there. Anyway, this is a poem entitled "No Rabies Necessary." Solitary, same time every day. The orb descends through wonderful July. Tick 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 goes the cuckoo clock. I still need glasses. I still need exercise. I still need to do all this crap. And in the back of the brain cave, the bats are recharging with a few push ups, sit ups, jumping jacks, stretching, patiently waiting. I try not to think about it, but it's always there. The endless, deep love for the things that will kill me. No rabies necessary. Just the gift of poison, Snow White's apple from the distillery, exclusively for the bats. They're cute, but they bite. But don't worry, no rabies necessary. So that's from the book here. Anyway, and I guess the other thing I'm doing is I'm working on an audiobook version of this book, which I'm quite excited about. Actually, I've been chipping away at that, and there will be a little bit of music involved with that, and it's an exciting thing for me. I'm really happy to be doing it. Anyway, I don't know if you're still there, Kelly. Well, you know what? Before I completely vamoose, I'm just going to see if you sent me an email or something here, if there's anything weird going on. Yeah. Oh, here it is. Okay. Airtight. Internet is fine. Seems to be. Well, I don't know. I don't know if you're there or if you're not there. Who knows? Anyway, I have had a blast, Kelly. I hope you're doing all right. I'm going to leave the studio now, but thanks for hanging out. Thanks for listening. It's been fun talking with you. I wish you were still there, but it looks like there's some kind of a technical glitch has occurred here. So anyway, wishing everybody all the best, and I hope everybody stays safe out there and has a great Sunday. All the best.